There's a profound truth hidden in the simple act of taking your next step. Right now, as you sit here, you have a choice. You can continue moving forward on the path that's authentically yours, or you can keep grasping for someone else's hand, hoping they'll pull you toward a destination that was never meant to be yours. The question isn't whether you're capable of walking alone. You were born with that power. The question is whether you're brave enough to trust it. I want to share something with you that might change how you see your journey forever. For decades, I've watched people, beautiful, talented, extraordinary people, compromise their dreams, their values, their very essence, all because they believed that any company was better than their own. They held on to relationships that drained them, jobs that diminished them, and friendships that kept them small, simply because the alternative, walking alone, seemed too frightening to consider. But here's what I've discovered. The path to your highest self is often a solitary one. Not because you're meant to be alone forever, but because you must first learn to be complete within yourself before you can truly share that completeness with another. Think about every great spiritual teacher, every revolutionary thinker, every person who has ever contributed something meaningful to this world. At some point in their journey, they had to step away from the crowd. They had to release the hands that were holding them back and trust their own inner compass. Buddha left his palace. Jesus went into the desert. Gandhi walked alone to the sea. They understood something that most of us struggle to accept. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. I'm not suggesting that all relationships are wrong or that you should become a hermit. What I'm inviting you to consider is this. Are you holding someone's hand because it genuinely serves your highest good and theirs? Or are you holding on because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't? There's a beautiful story I love to tell about a man who spent years trying to train a wild bird. Every day, he would put food in a cage and wait for the bird to enter. When it finally did, he closed the door, thinking he had succeeded. But the bird, once magnificent in flight, became listless and sad in captivity. Its song became a mere whisper of what it once was. One day, the man realized his mistake. He opened the cage door. The bird hesitated at first. It had grown comfortable with the security of its prison. But eventually, it flew free. To the man's amazement, the bird returned every evening, not because it was trapped, but because it chose to. The relationship became one of mutual respect and genuine connection, rather than dependency and fear. This is the difference between holding the wrong hand and finding your own way. When you're clinging to someone out of fear, you're both in cages. When you're free to be yourself, you create space for authentic connection to emerge. I remember my own journey with this truth. There was a time when I stayed in situations that weren't serving me because I thought it was the noble thing to do. I held on to friendships that had run their course, professional relationships that were stifling my growth, and yes, even romantic connections that had lost their spark long ago. I told myself I was being loyal, committed, responsible, but what I was really being was afraid of disappointing others, afraid of being judged, afraid of being alone. Most of all, afraid of discovering who I really was when all the external validation was stripped away. The turning point came when I realized that I was not only limiting my own potential, but also preventing the other person from finding their authentic path. When we hold on to relationships out of fear rather than love, we're not serving anyone. We're enabling each other's smallness rather than encouraging each other's greatness. Your soul knows the difference. Your soul knows when you're walking your path and when you're being dragged along someone else's. It knows when you're in alignment with your purpose and when you're living to please others. The feeling in your body when you're on your authentic path is unmistakable. It's energizing, it's peaceful, it's right. The feeling when you're holding the wrong hand is equally unmistakable. It's draining, it's anxious, it's forced. But here's where it gets interesting. When you finally find the courage to walk alone, something magical happens. You discover that you were never really alone at all. You begin to notice the synchronicities, the guidance, the support that was always there but was hidden beneath your desperation to hold on to what wasn't meant for you. The universe has a way of responding to authenticity. When you stop trying to force connections and start being genuinely yourself, you attract people who appreciate the real you. When you stop compromising your values to maintain relationships, you make space for relationships that honor your values. When you stop settling for less than you deserve, you create room for what you truly deserve to enter your life. I think about the people who have touched my life most profoundly, the teachers, The friends, the loved ones who have made a real difference. Without exception, they were people who were comfortable in their own skin, who had done their inner work, who could stand alone if necessary, but chose to connect from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. These are the people who inspire us, who challenge us, who help us grow. They don't need us to complete them because they've already found their completeness within themselves. And because of this, they're able to offer us something real, not their desperation or their fear, but their strength, their wisdom, their authentic presence. This is what becomes possible when you choose to walk alone rather than hold the wrong hand. You transform from someone who needs others to someone who can genuinely serve others. You shift from being a drain on relationships to being a source of energy in them. You move from seeking validation to offering inspiration. Let's be honest about what walking alone really means. It doesn't mean cutting everyone out of your life or becoming cold and distant. It means developing such a strong sense of who you are and what you stand for that you don't need others to define you. It means being so comfortable with your own company that you never stay in situations that compromise your integrity just to avoid being alone. Walking alone means trusting your inner voice even when everyone around you is telling you something different. It means having the courage to disappoint others when staying true to yourself requires it. It means being willing to be misunderstood rather than being untrue to who you are. I've seen people transform their entire lives by making this shift. I remember a woman who came to one of my seminars, trapped in a marriage that had become a prison for both her and her husband. They had stopped growing years ago, but they held on because they thought it was what they were supposed to do. She finally found the courage to have an honest conversation about their relationship, and to her surprise, he had been feeling the same way. They divorced amicably and both went on to find partners who were much better suited to who they had become. More importantly, they rediscovered who they were as individuals. Or consider the man who stayed in a corporate job for 15 years, climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. He held on to the security and the approval of his colleagues even though his soul was dying a little more each day. When he finally had the courage to leave and pursue his passion for teaching, he discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never experienced. His relationships improved because he was no longer bitter and resentful. His health improved because he was no longer fighting his authentic nature every day. These stories aren't unique. They're happening all around us, every day. Whenever someone chooses authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, their own path over the expectations of others. But walking alone requires more than just making external changes. It requires developing an internal foundation that can't be shaken by the opinions of others or the fear of being alone. This foundation is built through spiritual practice, through self-reflection, through developing a relationship with the part of yourself that is eternal and unchanging. When you know who you are at the deepest level, when you understand that you are not your thoughts, your emotions, your roles, or your relationships, but something far more fundamental than walking alone becomes not a burden but a joy. You realize that you carry within yourself everything you need to be happy, peaceful, and fulfilled. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice, a daily choice to turn inward rather than outward for your sense of worth and security. It's meditation in the morning rather than immediately reaching for your phone to see what others are doing. It's asking yourself what you truly want rather than what others expect from you. It's trusting your intuition even when you can't explain it logically. The beautiful paradox is that as you become more comfortable walking alone, you become more attractive to others, not because you're trying to be attractive, but because authenticity is inherently magnetic. People are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin, who don't need approval, who are living from their truth rather than their fears. I think of the great artists, writers, and innovators throughout history. Many of them were considered eccentric or difficult in their time because they refused to conform to what others expected of them. They walked alone, literally and figuratively, because they understood that their gifts could only be expressed authentically, not as modified versions designed to please others. Van Gogh sold only one painting in his lifetime, but he kept painting because he had to. Thoreau went to live alone at Walden Pond not because he disliked people, but because he needed to discover what was essential. Emily Dickinson lived as a recluse, but her poetry has touched millions of souls. They all chose their authentic path over the easier path of conformity and approval. You don't have to be an artist or a hermit to apply this wisdom. You simply have to be willing to prioritize your relationship with yourself over your relationship with others' opinions. You have to be willing to trust that the path that feels right to you, even if it looks strange to others, is the path you're meant to walk. This becomes particularly challenging in our relationships with family and friends. These are the people who have known us the longest, who may have the strongest investment in keeping us the same. When you start walking your authentic path, you may find that some people in your life are uncomfortable with your changes. They may try to pull you back into old patterns, old roles, old ways of being that no longer serve you. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you discover whether you're truly committed to your growth or whether you're still more committed to keeping others comfortable. The people who truly love you will support your journey, even if they don't understand it. The people who try to hold you back are often holding on to their own fears and limitations, not expressing genuine care for your well-being. Learning to distinguish between these two types of responses is crucial. Sometimes the people closest to us are the most threatened by our growth, because our changes challenge them to examine their own lives. Your commitment to authenticity can be like a mirror that reflects back to others the compromises they've made, the dreams they've abandoned, the truth they've been avoiding. This isn't your responsibility to fix. Your responsibility is to keep walking your path with compassion, but without compromise. You can love people and still make choices that disappoint them. You can be grateful for what relationships have given you while also recognizing when they've run their course. I learned this lesson deeply when I made the transition from traditional academia to the work I felt called to do in personal development and spirituality. Many of my colleagues thought I was making a mistake, throwing away a secure career for something uncertain and unconventional. Some friends stopped calling. Some family members worried I was having some kind of breakdown. But I had never felt more alive, more on purpose, more myself than when I started following my authentic calling. The people who truly mattered stayed with me through the transition. New people entered my life who were aligned with who I was becoming rather than who I had been. The work I was able to do reached more people and had more impact than anything I could have accomplished staying in the safe, approved path. This is what happens when you choose to walk alone rather than hold the wrong hand. You create space for the right connections to emerge. You align with opportunities that are meant for you rather than the ones you think you should want. You attract circumstances that support your growth rather than ones that keep you comfortable but small. But let me be clear about something. Walking alone doesn't mean being lonely. Loneliness comes from being disconnected from yourself, from feeling like you don't belong anywhere because you don't know who you really are. When you're walking your authentic path, even if you're physically alone, you feel connected to your purpose, to your values, to the deeper currents of life itself. Some of my most peaceful, most fulfilling moments have been spent in solitude, walking in nature without anyone to impress or please, sitting quietly without anyone's expectations to meet, writing without wondering what others would think. In these moments, I felt more connected to the universe than I ever have in a crowded room full of people who don't really know me. This connection to yourself becomes the foundation for all your other connections. When you know who you are and what you stand for, you can show up authentically in your relationships. You're not trying to be who you think others want you to be. You're simply being yourself and letting others decide if that works for them. This approach naturally filters your relationships. People who are intimidated by authenticity will tend to fall away. People who appreciate genuineness will be drawn closer. The result is smaller circles but deeper connections. Fewer relationships but more meaningful ones. I think about the difference between networking and connecting. Networking is about presenting a version of yourself that you think will get you what you want. Connecting is about showing up as who you are and seeing what emerges naturally. When you're walking your authentic path, every interaction becomes an opportunity for genuine connection, rather than strategic positioning. This shift changes everything. Your work becomes an expression of your values rather than just a way to pay bills. Your friendships become sources of mutual inspiration rather than obligations to maintain. Your romantic relationships become partnerships between two whole people rather than attempts to find your missing half. Speaking of romantic relationships, this is perhaps where the principle of walking alone versus holding the wrong hand is most relevant. How many people stay in relationships that have clearly run their course simply because they're afraid of being alone? How many compromise their dreams, their goals, their very identity to maintain a connection that no longer serves either person? I've counseled thousands of people over the years, and I can tell you that the fear of being alone keeps more people trapped in unfulfilling relationships than almost any other factor. They stay with partners who don't support their growth, who criticize their dreams, who drain their energy, simply because the alternative, being single, seems too frightening to consider. Here's what I've observed. The people who have the courage to leave relationships that aren't working inevitably find better ones. Not immediately, necessarily, but eventually. And in the meantime, they discover something invaluable. They learn to be happy on their own. This doesn't mean giving up on love or becoming cynical about relationships. It means developing such a rich relationship with yourself that you only enter partnerships that genuinely add to your life rather than ones you need to feel complete. When you approach relationships from wholeness rather than neediness, everything changes. You're not looking for someone to fix you or complete you or give your life meaning. You're looking for someone to share the meaning you've already found. You're not desperate to be chosen, you're carefully choosing. This creates the foundation for extraordinary relationships. When both people are whole within themselves, they can create something together that neither could create alone. When both people are walking their authentic paths, they can support each other's journey without losing themselves in the process. But to get to this point, you must first be willing to walk alone. You must first develop the inner resources to be content with your own company. You must first discover who you are when you're not trying to please anyone else. This process of self-discovery is sacred work. It's the work that every spiritual tradition, in its own way, points toward. It's the journey from ego to essence, from fear to love, from dependency to freedom. And it's available to every one of us right now, in this moment. You don't need anyone's permission to start walking your authentic path. You don't need anyone's approval to be who you really are. You don't need anyone's hand to hold to move in the direction of your dreams. What you need is the willingness to trust yourself, to listen to your inner voice, to take the next right step, even when you can't see the whole staircase. You need the courage to disappoint others when being true to yourself requires it. You need the faith that walking alone toward truth is better than holding hands while walking toward a lie. I want to leave you with this thought. Your authentic path is not selfish. When you have the courage to be yourself, to follow your calling, to live from your truth, you give others permission to do the same. Your authenticity becomes a beacon that lights the way for others who are still struggling in the darkness of other people's expectations. The world doesn't need another copy of someone else. The world needs the original you. And the only way to discover and express that original you is to be willing to walk alone when necessary, to trust your inner compass even when others question your direction, to choose your truth over their approval. So I invite you to consider, what hands are you holding that are keeping you from your highest path? What connections are you maintaining out of fear rather than love? What would become possible in your life if you had the courage to let go and trust your own journey? The path to your authentic self may be solitary at times, but it's never empty. It's filled with purpose, with meaning, with the quiet joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do, being exactly who you were born to be. And from that place of authentic selfhood, you'll find that the right hands will appear to hold, not because you need them to complete you, but because they celebrate the completeness you found within yourself. Not because you're afraid to walk alone, but because you're choosing to walk together towards something beautiful that neither of you could reach on your own. A practice that has transformed countless lives, including my own. Each morning, before you reach for your phone, before you check on what others are doing or thinking, spend just 10 minutes in silence with yourself. Ask yourself, what does my soul want today? Not what your family wants, not what your boss expects, not what society demands, but what your authentic self is calling you toward. Listen to the answer without judgment. You might hear whispers about a creative project you've been putting off, a conversation you need to have, a boundary you need to set, or simply a different way of approaching your day. These quiet moments of connection with yourself become the rudder that steers your ship toward your authentic destination. I remember a businessman who attended one of my workshops. He was successful by every external measure, corner office, expensive car, beautiful home, but inside he felt empty. He had spent so many years holding on to the hands of others' expectations that he had forgotten what his own dreams looked like. During that 10-minute morning practice, he kept hearing the same message. Write for months. He ignored it. After all, he wasn't a writer, he was a businessman. But the message persisted. Finally, he began waking up 30 minutes earlier to write before work. Those 30 minutes became the most alive he felt all day. 2 years later, he had completed his first novel. 5 years later, he had transitioned to writing full-time and found a fulfillment he never knew was possible in his corporate career. The voice of your authentic self is always there, waiting patiently for you to listen. It speaks in the language of excitement, of energy, of rightness. It might ask you to make changes that seem impractical or unreasonable to others. It might lead you away from security and toward adventure. It might require you to disappoint people you care about. But following this voice is the only way to live a life that is truly yours. Walking alone doesn't mean you have to figure everything out by yourself. The universe has a beautiful way of providing guidance and support when you're on your authentic path. Synchronicities begin to appear. The right book falls into your hands. The perfect mentor shows up. Opportunities align in ways that seem almost magical. But here's the key. This support comes to you when you're being true to yourself, not when you're trying to be who others want you to be. The universe responds to authenticity. It can't support a path that isn't really yours, because that path doesn't have the power of your true intention behind it. I think of this as the difference between swimming upstream and swimming downstream. When you're holding on to the wrong relationships, the wrong job, the wrong life choices because you think you should, you're swimming upstream. Everything is hard. Everything is a struggle. Everything requires enormous effort with little reward. But when you align with your authentic path, even if that path involves challenges, you're swimming downstream. There's a flow to your life, a sense that you're being carried toward your destination by forces larger than yourself. Obstacles become stepping stones rather than walls. Problems become opportunities for growth rather than evidence that you're on the wrong track. This doesn't mean the authentic path is always easy. In fact, it often requires more courage than the conventional path. It asks you to face your fears, to trust in the unknown, to believe in yourself when others don't believe in you. But the difficulty of the authentic path is different from the difficulty of living someone else's life. One drains you, the other strengthens you. I want to talk about fear for a moment, because fear is usually what keeps us holding the wrong hands. We're afraid of being judged, afraid of failing, afraid of being alone, afraid of making mistakes. But here's what I've learned. The things we're most afraid of losing are often the things that are keeping us from becoming who we're meant to be. That job that gives you security but kills your spirit. Losing it might be the best thing that ever happened to you. That relationship that feels safe but unfulfilling. Ending it might open the door to a love you never imagined possible. Those friends who make you feel like you belong but require you to be smaller than you are. Moving on from them might lead you to your tribe of authentic supporters. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is simply your ego's attempt to keep you safe from change. But your soul didn't come here to stay safe. Your soul came here to grow, to express, to experience, to contribute something unique to the world. And that can only happen when you're willing to move beyond the familiar into the unknown territory of your authentic self. One of the most profound shifts that happens when you start walking alone is that you begin to see other people differently. Instead of looking at them as potential sources of validation or security, you begin to see them as fellow travelers on their own journeys. You stop trying to change them or control them or get them to meet your needs, and you start appreciating them for who they are. This shift transforms all your relationships. Your parents are no longer people you need to please or rebel against. They're human beings doing the best they can with their own fears and limitations. Your romantic partner is no longer responsible for your happiness. They're a companion sharing the journey of life with you. Your friends are no longer people you need to impress. They're souls you can connect with authentically. When you stop needing others to be different than they are, you create space for genuine intimacy to emerge. When you're not trying to get anything from people, you're free to simply enjoy them. When you're not afraid of being abandoned, you're able to love without attachment to outcome. This is perhaps the greatest gift of learning to walk alone. It prepares you for true togetherness. It teaches you the difference between neediness and love, between dependency and interdependence, between settling for anyone and choosing wisely. I've watched people go through this transformation thousands of times. It usually begins with a crisis, a divorce, a job loss, a health scare, the death of a loved one. Something happens that strips away their external sources of security and forces them to find strength within themselves. Initially, it feels like the worst thing that could happen. Eventually, they realize it was exactly what they needed to find their authentic path. But you don't have to wait for a crisis. You can choose to start walking alone right now, while your life is stable, while your relationships are intact, while you still have time to make changes gradually rather than dramatically. You can begin to prioritize your relationship with yourself without abandoning everyone else. You can start making choices based on your inner guidance rather than external expectations. The question is, what would you do if you weren't afraid of disappointing others? What would you choose if you didn't need anyone's approval? What path would you walk if you trusted that you have everything within you that you need to succeed? These aren't just philosophical questions, they're practical invitations to begin living differently. Today, you can make one choice that honors your authentic self rather than others' expectations. Tomorrow, you can make another. Each choice builds your confidence in your own inner wisdom. Each step on your authentic path strengthens your ability to walk alone when necessary. As I close this message to you, I want you to know that choosing to walk alone when necessary is not selfish, it's the most generous thing you can do. When you're living authentically, you give others permission to do the same. When you're following your true path, you inspire others to find theirs. When you're no longer holding on to relationships out of fear, you make space for connections based on love. The world needs you to be yourself, not a modified version designed to please others, not a compromise between who you are and who others want you to be, but the full, authentic, magnificent expression of your unique soul. This is your gift to the world, and it can only be given when you have the courage to walk your own path. So take that first step. Let go of that hand that's pulling you away from your true direction. Trust your inner compass. Walk toward the life that's waiting for you. The life that only you can live. The contribution that only you can make. The love that only the authentic you can give and receive. The path may be solitary at times, but it leads to connections deeper than you ever imagined possible. The journey may be uncertain, but it's filled with discoveries that can only be made by those brave enough to explore their authentic territory. The destination may be unclear, but the direction is always the same, toward truth, toward love, toward the full expression of who you really are. This is your invitation. This is your moment. This is your path. Walk it with courage, walk it with faith, and walk it knowing that every step you take in authentic direction makes the world a little brighter for everyone who has the privilege of witnessing your journey.